Hello guys, welcome to Simp Recap channel. The film starts with a man named Callum Aldrich working his cleaning shift at an office. While on the job, he gets an unexpected call from an unknown person who threatens to expose private photos to his loved ones if he doesn't reach a designated place within 15 minutes. In a state of panic, Callum hurries to the specified location, only to find a car crash. The driver is on the ground, and the passenger is trapped inside the vehicle, needing help. Filled with fear, Callum dials 911 to report the incident. In a sudden turn of events, the driver, who was feigning unconsciousness, awakens and subdues Callum from behind, then kidnaps him. The next day, the police arrive at the crash site, and Chief Inspector John Luther takes charge of the case. Luther's partner, Martin, joins him in the investigation. It briefs him that the passenger in the car is Sari Jones, who disappeared 7 years ago. After scrutinizing the crime scene details, Luther deduces that Callum wasn't just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, but someone had intended to abduct him. He then reaches out to Callum's mother, Corinne, and promises to find her son. Luther has seen at least 100 people die. He probably shouldn't have promised that. Amidst the bystanders, there's a man named David Roby, seemingly concerned by Luther's involvement in the case. He is revealed to be the culprit. Realizing Luther could disrupt his plan, David, with his wild haircut, searches for any bad actions Luther did as a cop to get him off the case. Days later, Luther ends up in court, accused of several wrongdoings like scaring suspects, messing with evidence, and taking bribes. Because of these crimes, he lands in Hawksmoor maximum security prison. This news excites David, as he can now proceed with his plans without any interference, and it was so much easier than it should have been. David turns out to be a wealthy trader and serial killer who blackmails people for their dark secrets. In the prison, the inmates hate Luther as several of them are incarcerated because of him, hence they often form alliances and beat him up. The movie then cuts to a few years later. One day, Corinne receives a call in which she hears her son crying. She tries to talk to him, but before that, she is provided a location to meet him. Without thinking twice, Corinne drives to the location, which is an empty house. Upon entering, she calls out for her son and soon comes across a horrifying scene. Lifeless bodies suspended from the ceiling, including Callum's. Soon, parents of other victims also arrive, and it appears that everything has been planned. Just then, the room is set on fire. While at the house, Corinne notices a masked man watching her from a window. She manages to escape, but the other parents aren't as fortunate. The police arrive the next day, and DCI Odette Rain takes charge of the investigation. After a quick look around the house, Rain gathers her team and explains that the earliest murder occurred 11 years ago, and the most recent happened just last year. She suspects that these acts were well thought out and executed over a long time. She tasks the team with the mission of identifying any common factors among the murder cases, believing that this approach will bring them closer to the murderer. Meanwhile, within the prison walls, Luther receives an envelope conspicuously labeled with the number 65.8. He interprets it as a radio frequency, as there seems to be no other logical explanation for those digits. When he tunes into the specified frequency, he is confronted with a recording of Callum's anguished voice, captured just moments before his abduction. The recording reveals Callum's final moments before his death, including David confessing to putting Luther behind bars and throwing down a challenge to Luther. Later, Corinne visits Luther in prison and expresses her anger for not catching her son's killer. Luther tries to explain, but Corinne isn't ready to hear it. They have a short talk, and when Corinne leaves, we discover that David brought her there. He's pretending to comfort her, though it's uncertain if they've become friends. Who cares? Later on, Luther uses his hidden cell phone to inform Rain of the broadcast, but she refuses to accept any help from a criminal. In addition, she directs her subordinate, Archie, to get Luther's phone confiscated. Left with no other options, Luther contacts his former colleague Dennis to help him break out of the prison. But before they can delve further into the plan, the prison officers confiscate his phone. Later, Luther also liaises with the prison guards to get himself transferred to another prison with lower-level security. The guards refuse, saying that they can't change the system. Hearing this, Luther devises a plan to have the inmates attack him, which will ultimately result in the system relocating him. Not sure how that works, or why he waited 2 years to do it, but let's just watch him punch some large men. That same night, one of the prisoners attempts to commit the unthinkable, attracting the attention of the control room officers. They somehow manage to save the prisoner, but out of the blue, he knocks them out and escapes with the key. Was the guy faking it? Were the police officers in on it? What the hell is going on? The prisoner manages to open all the cell doors, leading to a lot of commotion. Many inmates join forces to attack Luther, subjecting him to a severe beating. The guards witness the violence and eventually opt to transfer him, which aligns with his plan all along. As Luther is being transported to another prison, a black van suddenly appears. It's Dennis and his crew, and they incapacitate the officers, successfully freeing Luther from captivity. They drop him off at a garage, and Luther compensates them for their assistance. Now liberated from confinement, Luther is determined to capture the serial killer, and his resolve burns stronger than ever. Rain gets word of Luther's escape and decides to seek help from Martin, a retired officer who is intimately familiar with Luther. Martin agrees to assist and heads to the prison to go through Luther's belongings. While searching, he stumbles upon the radio frequency, and it dawns on him that Luther's whereabouts could be pinpointed by tracing that specific frequency signal back to him. Source: Meanwhile, Luther arrives at the site of the broadcast and meets a tattoo artist named Derek. He demands to know who used his radio frequency, but Derek and his absurd haircut are initially hesitant to divulge any information. However, after a little intimidation, Derek confesses that he was blackmailed by a man for some of his private videos. According to Derek, he received the transmitter through a courier and was instructed to leave it running for 24 hours before ditching it somewhere. Derek also provides Luther with a cell phone. Armed with this newfound knowledge, Luther takes the cell phone and leaves just before the police show up. Meanwhile, in another place, a team of David's employees watches people from all over the world. They appear to have hacked into phones, cameras, tablets, and home security systems, allowing them to spy on individuals. David collects their private activities and has a team of secretaries enter this data into Excel sheets. He uses this information for blackmail, forcing people to do what he wants. In the next scene, Luther contacts Martin, seeking help in tracing a phone number. The latter reluctantly agrees and informs him of the location of Piccadilly Circus. After this, Martin also relays the information to Rain, who then deploys armed police, SCO-19, to apprehend Luther and the serial killer. Upon arriving at the location, Luther dials the number from Derek's cell phone and David, who happens to be there, receives it. This allows Luther to spot him. Trapped and left with no options, David immediately grabs a kid from the crowd and holds him at knife point. With a wicked smile, he declares, "This is just the beginning, my precious. Actually, we're only halfway there, Smeagol." In the next moment, a number of his blackmailed victims start leaping off a nearby building one by one, causing panic and chaos. Seizing the opportunity, David makes a run for the subway, with Luther and the pursuing police not far behind. At one point, Luther manages to catch up to David, resulting in a physical confrontation between the two. In the end, our hero prevails and gains the upper hand in this intense face-off, pinning David down, but the fight is soon interrupted by a police officer. Luther urges him to cuff David first, but the officer strikes him to the ground. This enables David to stab the officer and flee. Luther then applies first aid to the officer's wound, before making his own escape. In the aftermath, David calls his inside man Archie, questioning why he didn't inform him about Luther's escape from prison. When the latter fails to give a response, David threatens to leak his confidential videos. He then calls one of his men, named Kachimov, and asks about their plan's progress. In response, Kachimov shows him video footage of a group of teenagers whom he has captured. On the other hand, Luther contacts Martin and asks him to activate speakerphone mode. He then shares his insights about the commonality they've been seeking. According to Luther, David is blackmailing people by recording their private videos and killing them. He also mentions that in today's world, the fear of shame and getting caught is often stronger than the fear of death. Luther's got some intuition going there. During this chat, Rain manages to trace Luther's location and sends a team of officers to catch him. But Luther senses this and smashes his phone before making a quick escape. On the same evening, Rain contacts her daughter, Anya, to remind her to go to bed early because she won't be home due to her busy work schedule. With the girl home alone, it becomes easy for David to break into the house and abduct her. At the same time, Luther pays a visit to Corinne, hoping to learn more about the killer. He thinks that the murderer might have had some inside information about Callum, which is why he went to Corinne. Luther asks if she's noticed anyone new in her life since Callum's death. In response, she mentions meeting someone named Tommy at a support group, and this is where we find out that Tommy is actually David. At the police headquarters, Martin highlights a pattern wherein at least 5 families have been approached by a man in his 42nd over recent years. The names vary, but the descriptions share a common likeness. On checking their database, Rain finds out David's name. But before she can provide this information to her team, David contacts her, telling her about Anya. He then proposes a deal. He'll release the little girl if she brings Luther to him. Next, Rain contacts Luther and sets up a meeting at a restaurant. When they meet, she tries to overpower him and take him into custody. However, Luther isn't an easy capture. She attempts to put him in the car trunk, but he's just too big for that. He persuades her to collaborate, mentioning that there are several kids, like Anya, who are currently in danger. If they don't act, those kids could be harmed. Afterward, the two start investigating David and discover information about his ex-wife, Georgette. Apparently, she cheated on him with another man, and as a form of punishment, he burned her face. Now she is confined to a wheelchair, unable to move properly. She also looks really scary. Rain and Luther visit Georgette at her house and request for her help in catching David. At first she hesitates, fearing the consequences of revealing information. However, upon learning about the predicament of Rain's daughter, she reveals that David owns property abroad in Norway. With this newfound lead, Luther and Rain decide to travel to Norway in order to rescue the captives. Before leaving though, Luther calls Martin, seeking one last favor later on. Archie learns about Rain's departure and relays the information to David. Hearing this, David understands Georgette's betrayal and blackmails Archie to execute her. With no other choice, Archie sneaks into Georgette's place, but just before injecting her with a lethal drug, he is intercepted by Martin and other police officers. It's the same favor Luther asked earlier, as he knew that David would try to harm her. Archie, who isn't ready to turn himself in, administers the drug. In the following scene, Luther and Rain reach David's snow-covered mansion in Norway. Inside, they encounter mannequins and a girl hanging from the ceiling. Rain, thinking it's Anya, breaks down in tears and blames Luther, saying he should be up there instead, even though it was her mistake that let the bad guy escape earlier. She yells at him to go away. Luther obeys and leaves the room. A little while later, Rain comes to the realization that the suspended girl isn't Anya, and it's a bit surprising she didn't notice this immediately. However, before she can return to Luther, she's unexpectedly ambushed. By Kachimov, Gotta Kachimov. Back in the basement, David attacks Luther and restrains him with a chain. After a while, he starts a livestream titled The Red Bunker, where he subjects kidnapped victims to fatal torment. This livestream is watched by his followers, who derive enjoyment from the gruesome scenes and vote on what will happen to the victims. David announces that he has a surprise opening act for his followers, and it's not just his dumbass turtleneck. He introduces Luther. As a special guest, Rain is also taken to the underground bunker where Anya is being kept. David attempts to make the detectives harm each other. But then, Luther speaks to the online viewers and discloses that the police are tracing their IP addresses. And on the way here, this prompts the followers to exit the livestream out of fear, enraging David. As a result, he leaves the room and locks the door using his phone. Reacting quickly, Luther takes down a guard, frees Rain, and makes his way out of the room just before the door seals shut. This leaves Rain, Anya, and Kachimov trapped inside. Soon after, the kerosene spray activates, foreshadowing an imminent fire. Rain implores Kachimov to unlock the door, but the latter instead launches an attack on him. A fierce fight ensues between them, but despite being physically outmatched, Rain somehow manages to incapacitate her opponents. Somehow indeed. The punch didn't have much power. At the same time, David tries to escape in his Jeep, but Luther gets on board as well. They have a fierce fight while the Jeep drives off-road like a real badass, but it eventually crashes into a frozen lake. David attempts to swim out, but he gets stuck in the ice and passes away. Luther manages to unlock the bunker door with David's phone, saving Rain and Anya. As Luther's own breath starts to fade, he's on the verge of passing out. However, just in the nick of time, police divers arrive. Remarkably, within 3 minutes of the Jeep entering the water, they arrive, fully equipped in scuba gear, and rescue Luther. After these events, Luther is quickly taken to a London hospital. The news of the serial killer's demise is broadcast on television, bringing a sense of relief to Corinne. In the final scene, a senior official approaches Luther and offers him a job with the police department. He humorously asks, "Do I get to be 7? No, thank you so much for watching, guys.